From the heartland of America, it's the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf. Executive producer, David Stuckman.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 38 years. Now, we've all watched 1,000 TV shows where somebody's getting arrested and the police pull out their little card and start reading the Miranda warning, reading someone their rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to represent you. Now, we've talked to several attorneys on the podcast, but they've generally been judges and prosecutors, and they're all different kinds of attorneys: corporate lawyers, tax attorneys, probate and estate planning lawyers. But whenever you mention lawyer, the first thing people actually think of, sort of by default, is a criminal defense attorney. And many defense attorneys or lawyers will tell you they're the only actual lawyers out there. Michael Connelly's Lincoln lawyer character, Mickey Haller, when he was drunk and arguing with his attorney ex-wife, exclaimed, "You're not a lawyer, you're a prosecutor," which struck me as meaning that the criminal defense attorney carries a different burden, more so than other varieties of attorneys. And I don't mean burden like burden of proof. I mean the emotional burden. The clients are often guilty, and it can be taxing to represent them. We've discussed on this podcast before that as many as 75% of convicted felons in prison are diagnosable with antisocial personality disorder. But these are the everyday clients of a defense attorney. And being a criminal defense attorney is a daily battle of David versus Goliath. Often sole practitioners standing up against the machinery of government, the entire bureaucracy, the police, the prosecutors, everybody. Now, my guest today has been practicing law for over 3 decades. He has tried over 500 jury trials. He has been designated as a lawyer scientist by the American Chemical Society, and he further solidified this expertise by pursuing a master's in forensic toxicology from the University of Florida. And this gives him a cutting edge in cases involving DUIs, drug charges, sexual assaults, and other forensic heavy criminal matters, which in a CSI-driven world where juries expect forensics is becoming more and more important. Tad Nelson founded Tad Nelson Associates in Galveston, Texas, and he has an office there, as well as offices in Houston and League City, Texas. He also has been a legal commentator on multiple news programs talking about crime events in Texas. His YouTube channel, as well as his Instagram page, is full of legal commentary, and hopefully he'll share some of that knowledge with us today. Tad, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, good to see you, Shane. Glad to be here. Thanks a million.
Well, thanks. Now, I kind of gave you a short shift on your background there. Tell us more about you, how you got into law, what some of your other CV stuff is.
Well, I kind of, from about the age of 9, knew I was going to be a lawyer. And my dad was a longshoreman. I know some of the people might not know what longshoreman is, but that's somebody that works on the waterfront. So, we grew up, middle class, lower middle class, whatever. And I guess my dad always, might have had some legal issues or whatever. Not so much criminal legal issues, but always was like, Tad, you need to become a lawyer. You need, by the time I was 9, 10 years old, that's all I'd heard. So I kind of always knew that's what I was going to be. And then when I went off to, University of Texas, I kind of did the accounting background, general business, that kind of stuff. And I got into, I started working for a probate firm in downtown Houston. Thought that's what I wanted. Thought I wanted to be away from the courtroom. After about 9 months, I was pulling my hair out, losing my mind, and literally was. And it's funny you say, what's a real lawyer? And we do. We all think a real lawyer is the courtroom blusterer guy, And then I realized I'm not a lawyer. I'm sitting here in a cubicle talking to people about how their great grandchildren are going to have enough money. It just wasn't what I grew up thinking a lawyer was. So anywho, we always knew the elected DA in Galveston. He had always told me, the whole time I was at law school, if you ever need a job, call me. And then just one day I'm sitting there at my office in Houston, just losing it. I called him up and said, "Hey, Mike, you got a chance for me to work for you?" He goes, "Man, we got an opening." I said, I can be there in 2 weeks. And that's how I became a criminal lawyer.
So, I mean, you start off as a prosecutor then and spent some time doing that?
I did 3 years. It's kind of what's funny is I don't really have the prosecutor personality, but it was always kind of known that the way to do it is to give them 3 years. That's what's fair.
Right.
I mean, the last 6 months I was counting the days. I was just trying to get to the finish line. But yeah, I did the bare minimum and then got out and did my own thing.
Well, I mean, and that's a different mindset when you're, the prosecutor, when you're representing the government and you're trying to get justice, I guess. But then the criminal defense attorney. Now, a lot of criminal defense attorneys, because obviously in my line of work, I know a lot of criminal defense attorneys. They're not so much we want to try and get people off, as much as we want to hold the state to account. There are rules on how we do all this, and we want to make sure that everybody's following the rules. Otherwise, nobody's following the rules. So, I mean, is that sort of the approach you take to it from in criminal defense work? Because I know a lot of people will sit there and go, "How can you represent these criminals?"
Yeah, there are a lot of people that do that, and it's one thing that, as far as what I do, I don't lose one lick of sleep, no matter how bad the person is, because you kind of hit on it. It's about the system. We can't complain, about what I do for a living when we also want to say, hey, we have the best system in the world. And if we had a system where there wasn't a guy like me or people that are good at what I do, people like me that are good at it. And if we only had bad lawyers that just let the government run over the people, that wouldn't be, a good system. So in essence, the fact that we do have these animated kind of, A personality defense lawyers that, go, as long as they're ethical, that's what makes the system work. Now, once, somebody crosses that line of ethics, obviously that goes with anything, used car salesman, anything down the line. You cross that line of being just a liar, shame on you. That's not what the system's about either. We have as many lawyers doing that as we do police officers, both ways. It cuts both ways. But the essence of our system is based on everybody working hard and working honest. So, yeah, I mean, I do hear that a lot, Shane, but if they really took the time to understand, it's just so easy to see me sitting next to a scumbag that's, accused of touching children and thinking, I'm a bad guy too. But if they really took a little bit of time to understand why it's so important that I'm there, they'd probably have a little different understanding, I think.
Well, I think we make the same arguments. I mean, maybe rationalization, but I think our arguments in the bail bond business. I mean, the people are like, how could this person be out of jail? They're charged with this horrible crime. It's like, well, yeah, but that's not my role to determine whether or not they're guilty of this crime. My role is to make sure that they show up to answer the charges against them, guilty or innocent. And so, I think a lot of times people sort of in the middle. I mean, and I think a criminal defense attorney is kind of in the middle. They're holding the state to account. The bail bondsman's in the middle, and that they're balancing both, the presumption of innocence with the need to have that person show up for court to answer those charges against them. Sometimes the people in the middle take a lot of abuse.
Oh, the old saying, if you go down the middle of the road, you get hit by both sides of traffic. I mean, it's true. To get ready for my conversation with you, Shane, I watched some of the videos of Sean Tier. He's our new elected DA down here in Harris County. Good guy. I've known Sean for about 20 years. Good guy. I think he's going to do a great job. And Texas is an interesting place because, they call it purple, but if it's purple here, it's light purple. It's still a red state. But Harris County is a very blue section of the state. So you have two dynamics here going. You got Abbott up there in Austin trying to make all these crazy rules to not let people out. And then you have the big push in Harris County, which is just like you said. We can't have somebody on a misdemeanor staying in jail for 180 days because they can't come up with $500. I mean, that's just crazy, and that's what was going on. And,
right.
And then with felonies, now there's a big push. I think I heard it was Senate Bill 5 or something that's coming down in Texas, and they're trying to strengthen it up. And it's basically Austin trying to get their clamps on Harris County, Houston, and trying to make them behave, and the reality of it is they do hundreds of thousands of cases. There's no way you can do 100,000 cases and not have somebody get out on bail and do something else bad. I mean, the numbers don't allow it. But when you jump on one, just like everything in politics, You have one really bad one, you jump on it, you find something that scares people, and then find somebody to blame for it. It's no different than politics. It is politics.
So let's talk about Harris County a little bit, because it's been actually, as long as I've been in the bail bond business, it's been a focal point of bail reform issues. I know that the Professional Bail Agents of the United States, PBUS, was originally formed by Gerald Monks in response to activity in Harris County, and that's been 40 years ago. And the most recent incarnation of this was the O'Donnell versus Harris County case. Can you talk about that from a ground perspective of how that all came to pass?
And that was, 17 or 18 when the federal case?
That's when it started. I mean, it drug on for a while.
Sure. And then we had all the reforms of 2019.
Right.
And that's when we really started doing more PR releases and what have you. And again, it was because people that had no money on small felonies were sitting in jail waiting for trial over a year on stuff that, the rich white people would have been out in 8 hours, and it all comes down to, they don't have money. It's an indigent deal. So what happened in 19 is we started coming up with more ways to, I have a bunch of bonds guys that I play golf with, and, they even talk about it from the other side. The way it affects their business is now, for a while, you're releasing people that probably should have to pay a cash bond. And you're releasing, too many. It's like any pendulum. It swings by the midpoint just too much. So my bondsmen, we do a lot of walkthroughs. We'll bring them up, and we go to court if there's a warrant, and we go, grovel to the judge and try to get a bond. Right. And, I go with my bond guy, and like, he'll come back, so he has to, and he'll go, well, okay, Tad, she gave him a PR bond. I'm out. I'm going back to my office. And when you're just really trying to look for a reasonable bond, that's when it's swung too far. Now there's a big push, like I said, coming out of Austin, and, they've got the clamps on Sean a little bit, and I think they're bending his ear. But he made a good point on one of the things I was looking at is, if you do commit to go back to a cash bond system where you're going to keep indigent people in jail longer than they should be, you're going to have to come up with other money, for the DPS crime lab. I mean, I'm sorry, if you're going to have somebody waiting on a ballistics test, that can't be 18 months.
Right.
That's what's crazy. So that's what people don't realize, that you're in the biz. I do it. The people that don't understand, that aren't in this, don't grasp that one little thing, like, hey, we're not going to allow cash, or we're going to push for no cash bonds. We're going to try to get PR bonds. They don't understand how that just moves the whole system, And if you do take away those PR bonds, then the rest of the system has to work, or now there's another bottleneck. Everything's related. All the boxes are connected.
Sure. I mean, it's process engineering. I mean, if you switch up something in the process, then something else is going to break or need to be fixed elsewhere. Now, O'Donnell, I think, though, mandated, essentially zero bail releases for all misdemeanors out of Harris County.
Absolutely, yes.
And so, I mean, that wasn't a question of balance. It wasn't, oh, hey, we're
unless there's a couple exceptions to it. Okay. If there's priors, and also if they're the state could file. We had a procedure where the state could file something to bring it up and say, hey, this person shouldn't be allowed. Minor procedures. You're still right. It wasn't just an automatic fall through, but yeah, it was overnight. It was 90% and above.
Right, and we saw a lot of feedback from like the FOP there, and there's a group, Harris County Court Watch, and some of the law enforcement there was indicating that, one, you saw a big bump in crime after that, and then the question is, what's the causal portion of that? Is that the people that we let go, or is that COVID, or was it a hurricane, or what was the issue that caused a huge crime spike right about that time? And I mean, the easy solution is, hey, bail changed, crime went up. Whether that's, a direct one-on-one correlation is hard to say. Sorry, I kind of lost my train there. Did that all the time. You don't, that doesn't affect you. So have you seen, I think there's been an increase in crime in Houston over that, whether that's directly related to that or not. There's been a big increase in crime. Has that bled over? My son used to live in Baytown, which was outside of Harris County. And so I know that there were signs up there that said, "You're not in Harris County anymore. We prosecute crimes." So I didn't know if maybe in Galveston County, if they were adopting some of those same ideas, or if it was limited to Harris County.
It is limited in the sense of Galveston is still, cash bond. I mean,
Right.
there are so few, PR bonds coming out of Galveston. And as a matter of fact, when you go ask the judge, if we go up to one of the misdemeanor judges and say, hey, this person doesn't have any money, can we have a PR bond? They think we're talking Chinese. They still don't get it, and it's where I'm sitting right now. I'm literally closer to Baytown, where you were talking about, than I am to Harris County. I mean, to downtown Houston. I'm on a little island right next to Kemah. So I'm a little bit south of Baytown.
Okay.
So yeah, I remember those signs, and it's the same kind of thing. We're kind of like that. We have a couple places where we have a couple signs where kids hang out on the beach, where we got zero tolerance and you will stay in jail kind of signs. But it is different than Harris County. Harris County is the only one that really opened the floodgate,
Right.
And you're 100% right. The numbers went up. But it also went, it was also right around the COVID time. It was coming off the hurricane time. You had a lot of people coming in. A lot of people that came in didn't leave, and then obviously once they overstay their welcome, then, there's obviously going to be a crime element there.
Sure.
So you're right. We could never pinpoint it. But the easy argument is bond changed. We made it easier. Crime went up. That's the one that you can really convince people. When you see the commercials for who's running for stuff, they always go back to that. Kim Ogg, she let so-and-so out. It wasn't her bond issue. She was there, that kind of nonsense.
Well, we interviewed Kim Ogg on the podcast here several months ago. I think right after she lost the primary. And one of the things that she pointed out was initially she got a lot of money in her first campaign from the Open Societies Foundation, or whatever the Soros group is called these days. And one of the conditions of that was implicit, I guess not explicit, but implicit, was that she would follow their agenda on zero bail. And then at some point in time, she sort of backed away from that. She was seeing an increase in crime and backed away from that. And then they turned around for the next election and pulled all that funding, and it went to Sean. And I know I watched a debate, an ACLU sponsored debate, and he's like, "Oh, we're not going back to cash bail." So I mean, now that he's in office, we've had a couple months of him in office, and I know you have to practice with his people, so you don't want to say something too bad. But how are we looking with this new regime? Are we looking at still tough on crime, or are we looking at more lenient release policies?
I don't think we're going to ever go back to 100%. But and I watched it, to prepare to talk to you. I watched a couple of his, conversations that he had with the local news,
Right.
And he's trying to thread a needle. He actually went on and was talking about, all the problems implicit. He never said that he was against cashless bail. But what he did say is, if we're not going to do those things, we're going to have to fix some other areas where they don't stay there. So, I agree with you on the whole Kim thing. Is Kim changed who she was a little bit, and that's why she's not there. But she did that on a lot of other issues as well. She got in as one person and then realized she had to contort herself a little bit to be that person, and then got back to where she felt comfortable, which they all do. Right. And Sean, I mean, it was, I watched it, like I said, 2 or 3 hours ago, and I hadn't seen that position he took, but he had to contort himself as well. And, whenever somebody's when you ask somebody a direct question about something, and that they shouldn't support it. And when they say stuff like, well, it doesn't go far enough, on this concept, and that's such bullshit, I mean, and I was like, that's just not the point of what we're talking about. But he clearly wants to do what he said,
right?
But he realizes there are problems, and they're going to have to find a sweet spot, And until he does, you just can't. There's going to have to be a sweet spot. It's that simple.
Trying to find some balance there between.
Yeah, and he actually used the word balance, and like I said, Sean's a smart guy. He's a guy's guy. He knows how to work a room. He always has. Good looking guy, got a good smile. Knows how to get people to want to like him. And, Clinton has kind of deal. And he's going to have to. But this issue, you know how this issue is. I mean, this one is the one that, you can't stay in the middle of the road long on this.
Well, no, and if you're the DA and you have aspirations for higher political office, if crime gets out of control, that's an anchor. That's going to drag you down. It cost you any potential for a higher office, but it might cost you the office you're currently in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think that was the beginning of the end for Kim a little bit, and obviously the money. I mean, but it wasn't, hers wasn't even close.
Right.
It was, she had, like I said, she had, you lose 2 or 3 factions, then you can't find the numbers to get to win.
Well, it seems like she got in a direct argument with the chief judge there, didn't she? Wasn't that, pretty highly publicized as well?
Oh, everything's yes. That was with everything else that goes on with that DA's office. But that's why I enjoy working in Galveston, although Galveston has become a lot more conservative and it's gotten weird. 20 years ago, Galveston was a happy little democratic society, island, but it's gotten a lot more conservative and, it's changed.
So, and this is off the bell topic, but so you're in Galveston a lot, but how do you deal with the humidity? We always thought the humidity was bad here in Kansas. But my wife and I, long before we were married, took a trip to Galveston, and we stayed in the hotel right there on the seawall, and got the blanket or the towels wet and went and hung them out on the rail to dry.
No,
we were there for a week and they never dry.
That's so true. You just got to deal with it. It's so funny. You just get used to sweating through your suits and your shirts. It's just gross. But yeah, I mean, how many days of 100%, temperature and 100% humidity can one person take in a year? It's horrible.
Thankful for air conditioning anyway.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let's talk more about you and the law in general. Your website describes you as a lawyer scientist, and you've indicated that you do forensic defense work. And just in broad strokes, what does that mean? And maybe we can drill down on that a little bit.
Well, kind of the lawyer scientist designation came from the American Chemical Society. I thought it was kind of goofy, but it's something that they came up when we did all this thing. There was this whole system set up at Axiom Lab, which is a lab in Chicago, and we went up there with a doctor named Dr. Polite, and Dr. Harold McNair was involved in it. Dr. McNair was the emeritus, whatever they call him, at Virginia Tech. He basically he invented gas chromatography. He passed away about 5 years ago, but he's the one that actually, trained us. So we got this great training at Axiom Lab. That's where we came up with this. I think it was between 280 and then hours to maybe 320, somewhere in there. And then we took an exam and all this stuff. So the majority of us that went through this program feel pretty comfortable dealing with all the DWI stuff. And that's where the gas chromatography. We also did a little bit on liquid chromatography. All that, a liquid chromatograph is so expensive. You haven't really seen those in the government yet. But, it was kind of the start on my science. And when I was doing that, I started going to Galveston College, just a little junior college down here, taking some chemistry courses, trying to get more up on it. And then, all you got to do is go to court 1 or 2 times and have a chemist from the DPS lab roll over you and then go read something and find out they were taking shortcuts and you didn't know it. I mean, that's always been embarrassing to me. There's 2 kinds of young people. The one person that's deathly afraid of what they don't know, that was me. And then you got the other kind of young person that thinks they know everything. Well, I never, thank God, got into that category. So I was always wanting to learn, probably why I stayed in school most of my life or either taught school. But with the forensics, as a very young lawyer, I witnessed some of the shortcuts the government was taking. And that's when I said, hey, that's got to stop happening. I've got to know the lingo. I've got to know what they're doing. I've got to know what they should do. Because if I don't know what they should do, it doesn't matter what they say when they testify. It's the old joke I made. If you don't understand like breath testing machines or how that should work, the government person could come in, the expert could come in with a shoebox and write 1.5 on an index card, put it in a shoebox, blow a straw into it and say, you're a 1.5. If you don't know that's not a machine, if you don't really know, they could fool you like that. Not that bad, obviously, but that's the kind of the point. And that's why, I've stuck with the science. And, you obviously see the science in DWI cases, but we see it in so many other cases. And that's why I did the forensic things out of Florida is, I do a lot of sex cases, you know, and that's a really big deal with the DNA and all the different stuff. And, once you start getting in the whole science thing, it can either get into shaken baby stuff. There's so many justifications and rationalizations that the government will make that's just not accurate. I'm sorry, it's like a shaken baby deal. Just because a baby, has a broken leg or something, I've watched a doctor talk about a spiral fracture, and because of this type of fracture, they knew that the parent had to be holding the top of the leg with one hand and turning the bottom leg with it. I mean, it was almost like something that a parent couldn't even get their hands to do. And we brought in an expert that can tell it our way. And it was like, that's ridiculous. But I would have never known that without training, hey, that sounds good to me, that kind of thing. But you've got to know the lingo. You got to be where they are, talk to them their language. And if obviously, with just a master's in forensic toxicology, I'm not going to know everything, but I do feel more comfortable, tracking it down. And that's the main thing. Well, it keeps me in the game.
If you know Latin, you can read the old religious texts and make some decisions about what's in there. And where, maybe this isn't what this actually means. If you don't know Latin, it's like, well, these are some really pretty pictures.
Right. That's a perfect analogy. That really is. That's dead on balls accurate. Yeah.
So the gas chromatology or chromatology?
Yes, gas chromatology.
How is that different from like gas spectrum analysis that they use in like drug testing? Is it?
Oh, it's yeah. It's very similar. It's absolutely. And the way the machine's based up, I'll tell you the interesting thing where I really understood it. So I'm sitting there and these machines, are $500,000 and this lab has, 16, 17 of them. Right. And I know I'm going that like this group of lawyers, he does a class like once a quarter, different classes. So there's like 15 of us and we only pay $3,000. And I'm going, okay, so that's, $50,000 a deal. We do that 3 times a year. He's not even making $250,000 from us. And I went to lunch with him, Dr. Polite, who owned the lab. And I said, you're clearly not making your money off of us. Where do you make your money? And this is when I realized what's going on. He makes it from the petrochemical industry. All the stuff is looked at through the petrochemical industry. So you can imagine the importance of what they're doing. When you're doing something for money, it's always so much more important than what you're doing it for like us. But that's where, why it became so important to me. And I started understanding it. And it's all gas spec. They made it, the gas chromatography and the, the spec, which is in there too. And they're all related. Like with petrol, they'll run a substance through there and they need to know the percentages of maybe 70 different compounds.
Sure.
Like when we run blood, we're only looking for 5 or 6, depending on which state you're in. But the other ones, they've got to know to a T, and that's what's so good about gas chromatography, mass spec, is it is separation science, and it's the gold standard.
Well, my son, I know I referenced him living down in Baytown, but he was living in Baytown because he initially started up in Kansas City here working for ExxonMobil in their oil testing lab, and then got transferred down to Beaumont and then was making that drive between Beaumont, but essentially doing the same thing. I mean, they've got 15 or 20 big machines. And so he'd go through all this different stuff, how we test it, how we burn this off, how we use the solvents to clean this so we don't get false positive. I mean, there's just these protocols on how everything's supposed to be done to where they know what the specs are just on oil and grease. And because they're, you don't really think about this, and this is probably off the topic of bail or even criminal justice, but, like just your motor oil has like 70 different compounds in it, different detergents, different molybdenum metals, different things to make it work better. And so they have to test to make sure those things are all within spec. So you're getting your 10W30 weight versus your 5W40 and whether it's got detergent, how it's going to work. And, whether it's for, using in wind turbines or airplanes or whatever. And the specs are all different. The oil's got to be completely different for that. So yeah, they use all those same machines. Anyway, we don't need to talk about that. But
going on that same thing is there was one time we came back from lunch and, we have our little printouts for when you do blood. And, you're like I said, you're looking for 5 or 6 things. So he hands me my, my graphs and then he hands me a box. He says, this is the equivalent of 1 run for Exxon that I'm doing. And so basically for one run, which my run would have been 3 or 4 pieces of paper, this was like 1,000 because they had to do the graphs of so many different compounds. It was like 600 plus. I mean, it's crazy. But it's and that's why they do it. That's obviously your son knew that.
So one of the on your YouTube channel, and I would encourage everyone to go to it because it's interesting. But your pinned video that goes in first was talking about a particular case, and it looked like it dealt specifically with forensics. It was, I think, a DUI. Can you and there were some problems with the testing. Can you talk about that case a little bit because that was really interesting?
Well, that's one of my favorite cases ever, and a guy doesn't mind me use his name, named Jason Sonnenberg, great guy. Okay. He had some drinking issues, so he'd obviously been to the pen twice. So now, third time in Texas, you're 25 to life. So this is about, I don't know if you remember the time, there was when the whole all these states had this law where on a felony DWI or an intox manslaughter, that it was automatic you had to give your blood. Remember that?
Right.
Okay, so that they wrote a law that says, hey, Fourth Amendment doesn't apply. We're going to take your blood if these things happen. Okay, so right about that time, right about that time, this guy, Jason, gets charged with this DWI third. Okay, so it's going through, and then there was a case called McNeely versus Arizona, and ultimately, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't write a statute that says that. You still have to have the Fourth Amendment.
Right.
And ultimately it was going through Texas. And for some reason, on our side, the defense lawyers, we all knew we all felt comfortable that we were going to win, that Texas was going to have to follow suit. But this particular case was an automatic blood draw, and he was a 2-4, so 3 times the legal limit. So they take his blood, which we'll get to how that was wrong. But ultimately, the government made us a 14-year offer. And this was before that law was determined in Texas, because there were going to be a couple of exceptions. Ultimately, none of them went through. So our conversation the week before trial is like, hey, here's the deal. The government's got you a 14-year offer on the table. We're going to win this, in appeals. We're on the right side here. If we go to trial, we're most likely going to lose, and we'll try like hell, and we got a couple issues, but you're going to get somewhere between 25 and 50, but we'll be able to appeal it, and then we'll come back here. We'll be able to keep the blood out, and we're in a different position. And what do you want to do? He says, well, I'm not taking 14. He goes, how long am I going to wait there? I said, well, appeals, you're probably looking at 2.5, 3 years. So It's much better than 14 because I'll do half, So he made a gamble. Anyway, so
absolutely.
When we get to trial, this is where it gets really interesting. So this was right when I got my certification, and my partner, Amber Spurlock, she had gotten hers roughly at the same time that I did up at Axiom, our lawyer. So everybody, we were the first ones down here to have it. The DAs were always nervous about us and our understanding because we bring in stuff and what have you. So they'd always, in addition to have the chemist that did the test, they usually bring in the lab director for testifying, because we'd make the chemists look like they were taking shortcuts and all this other crap. So the lab director will always come in and want to go, no, they did it right. And usually, even though we would call the chemists and try to talk about stuff, they never really were that sharing of stuff with us. We had the right to call them, and, they could at least say, yeah, I talked to Mr. Nelson and he asked me a couple questions. But the lab director's name was Derek Sanders. And this is Pasadena. And so after the chemists had already done and went through all their tests, then he gets up there and we start talking to him. Well, Amber was questioning him. And ultimately, blood testing's a lot like a doctor. If you see medical reports and there's handwriting on it, concentrate on that. If the doctor took his time to write something in handwriting on a report, it's probably important. And there was this one part where it was talking about auto sampler locks up. And, the first guy, the chemist, just poo-pooed it. Oh, yeah, it locks up. It happens all the time, blah, 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 blah. And then Derek Sanders gets up there, and that's the first time he had seen it. So Amber's going, hey, well, we're going to go through all the stuff that's writing, and you just explain to us what it means. Here it says auto sampler. And he looks at it and he starts staring, and you can see his expression is like, uh-oh. And then he says, Miss Spurlock, I see the stuff we gave you. Would you hand me that binder right there, that purple one or whatever the color was? She hands it to him. He opens it himself and he starts looking through metadata. And the metadata can tell him when it locked up, where my vial was in the lockup, and when it started back up. So it locks up at 6:45 at night. My vial was the next vial. So mine was closest to the heating source.
Right.
And it didn't unlock till the chemist got there in the morning. So basically the chemist gets there at 7:30 in the morning, does one of those things we used to do the TV, thing starts back up, but my blood sat there for over 12 hours and cooked. And that would make it ferment.
Sure.
In theory. Yeah. And so he says that, and he looks up at her and he goes, Miss Spurlock, that blood's no good. And she goes like, what do you mean no good? He goes, I mean, it's no good. It can't be used. It's not valid. Most honest man, we're still friends to this day. He got transferred to Austin, got the big job at the DPS lab. But whenever he comes to town to see his family, he drops by. I mean, we stayed in touch. Just really one of the most honest people I've ever met. He saved this guy's life, but it was all because he was willing to be honest with us.
Makes you wonder though, if it locks up all the time.
What they said,
Yeah.
But I tell you, it makes people want to figure out what the metadata says. Yeah.
Right. I mean, how many other people are, locked up because of that, because the things went wrong?
Oh, I think there's tons. None of this is infallible. All the science, and here's what, it's funny in today's world where you can't pick up social media and somebody's bad-mouthing science or some other nonsense. But that's another story. That's another show altogether. But the reality of it is, it's not the science. It's the application by the human being of the science more times than not. The science, now science is always changing because that's what science is. You're always progress, reanalyze, and improve. But the essence of like that didn't change the fact that gas chromatography is the gold standard. I mean, there was a machine that was created by us that didn't work. And if that, who knows what it would have been if it wouldn't have locked up. The guy looked good. That's what was so weird. He looked great. And the jury, literally, this was a felony. This was a felony where they knew that he had already been to the pen twice, obviously, or they knew that he had been charged with DWI twice. They weren't out 7 minutes. It takes 5 minutes to elect a foreman, and 2 minutes to read the charge. I mean, I don't think they sat down because when, Derek Sanders says that blood's no good, they were out. What's funny is the judge called us up and looked at the government, said, have you had enough? You ready to dump this case? And the government says, no, we can go on our other stuff. Okay. The judge kind of threw his hands up, says, hey, it's your trial. Do what you got to do.
It's like I referenced earlier, we're in a CSI world here on this stuff. I mean, juries want to see, evidence. I mean, that is not just, well, he was a little stumbly right there, maybe.
Yeah. No, it's crazy as serious jury trials are. The one thing you got to say, I don't care if you're in a conservative or a liberal, jurors care and they get it. There'll be one that sneaks in with an agenda every now and then. You can't help that.
Sure.
But by and large, it was another type of forensics case that we had that was, it was digital forensics from computers, and there was some Snapchat stuff going back and forth. And my guy clearly was the bad guy. He was, sending nasty, Snapchats to like a 12-year-old. And they thought they had his handle. And so they subpoenaed Snapchat to get the stuff. Well, they misspelled his handle.
Right.
And the detective, well, the one thing about any conversation, like this conversation we're having, there's not only me, there's you. If you don't get it from me, go get it from you, right? So rather than we're going, oh, we got the wrong one here, and going to talk to the little girl and getting her handle and subpoena it again, this detective actually got on the stand and said, well, I'd only like to send one subpoena. If it doesn't work out, that's enough. And the jury was just hating. I mean, they want you to do your work.
Well, sure. Not just, he's guilty because I say so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And they think, and they think they can get away with that sometimes.
I've sat on at least 3 different juries, and one of them was as an alternate, but the other 2, I was actually one of the people on it. And every single one of those, I mean, we went through and we worked our way through those jury instructions. It's like instruction 1, okay, you got to find here, yes or no, and your if-then tree and all that stuff. I mean, and every single time they worked through it. My wife basically sat on a federal jury for some sort of housing or product liability thing. And they had 50 pages of instructions on there, but they did that too. They worked their way right through the instructions. Okay, this is what this says. We've recently been discussing a bail bond kidnapping case that's in federal court out of Missouri, Wayne Lozier. Essentially, Mr. Lozier was convicted of kidnapping. The argument was that he wasn't licensed to be a bounty hunter in Missouri. He wasn't picking up the wrong person. He didn't kick in the wrong door. He didn't do any of the stuff that normally get bondsmen in trouble. He did everything right except that he hadn't followed the licensing regimen in the state of Missouri. And so when he picked up this girl and took her out, the local government, it's a misdemeanor. The local government's like, yeah, we're not charging. We don't care. Get her out of here. So somehow the feds jumped in and got a hold of that case and charged him with federal kidnapping because and essentially saying it was an unlawful kidnapping. It was unlawful for him to take her into custody because he wasn't licensed. And when he took her across state lines, that made it a federal kidnapping. And he was looking at life in prison. But the case was recently overturned, and this is a long way around to this, but it was overturned because of errors in the jury instruction. I mean, basically, the judge essentially said in this jury instruction, you have to find him guilty if this occurs, and then basically, stuff that he'd already admitted to. Yes, I wasn't licensed, but it was still okay for me to do it because I had the authority. Anyway, I guess what I'm getting is the jury instructions can be particularly important in those sorts of things. And I think juries do follow them when they're tasked with that.
Oh, without a doubt. It's without a doubt. I think juries really take it serious, and that's good. I mean, like I said, everybody's got to work hard and work honest, and I think juries do. I think we're blessed to have that. I think we're very lucky the way we do it in this country.
Now, you'd mentioned about the Snapchat. I think the other thing, if you don't follow criminal prosecutions, I think the deal last fall, the Trump, the Fannie Willis, Nathan Wade debacle in Fulton County, I think it had been the first exposure that a lot of people had to just how much data can be gleaned from your phone, if nothing else. Not to mention other sources of social media. What is digital forensic evidence that in a criminal defense perspective?
Well, it can really be anything. I mean, everything is digital now. Think about, your Ring camera is digital. Your phone is digital. It could be anything. It can be computers. Like, nowadays, back, for the longest time, back when we used to first do kiddie porn cases, it was just like you would see in your head, the way they used to, 30 years ago, the guy that was possessing kiddie porn was some pervert in an alley with a briefcase with 35 pictures, and, then all of a sudden it became, the digital pictures. And now, with all the stuff on the computer, it's all coming out of Hungary or Yugoslavia. And, they have numbers on all these pictures. But, that's one form of it there. Then you have the cameras. I had an interesting case where my guy was accused of murder about 45 miles south of Houston. Well, his whole deal, he wanted to kill like an ex-business partner, so he comes up with this deal. He wants to, he's at a dance club in Houston, dancing more than he would usually dance, so everybody would see. So then he kind of sneaks away. He sneaks away, drives 45 minutes away, literally, then comes back, kind of like he came in the bathroom or something, starts dancing some more, more than he would ever dance. So he could be seen at this club. And then he said, hey, I was at the club all night. I didn't do that. I don't know what you're talking about. And then it turns
an alibi.
Right. Then it turns out the government came up with this thing where you could see, Houston here and then Brazoria County down here. And they literally just mapped out his drive, his cell phone using the towers. And it's just a perfect line to the house, a perfect line back, back to the bar. I mean, there is just, I don't know how people even try to commit crimes anymore with all the Ring cams. I mean, back in the day, they used to say, there's 100 ways you can get caught in any crime, and a rocket scientist can't think of 50 of them. I don't know how you think of any of them these days, Because, between cameras, phones, everybody, traffic lights. I mean, I don't know how you can move without, and that's why they catch everybody.
Well, your car has a tracker in it for the most part. I mean, I was on my Ford Plus app or whatever the other day checking on where I could start my car, but it also knows exactly where I'm at all the time.
Right. It's in that the whatever the one that all the families use, Life Check 360 or something.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I had a case where a couple, that were dating had gone down to the beach and they were driving a car really fast. And it turned out, my client was driving because the other guy, it was his car, but he let her drive it. And he got killed in the wreck. But, there was estimates of people that saw them driving that they were doing 100 miles an hour. Well, and it wasn't exactly true, but what helped me negotiate it was, we were able to get their lifetime 360 or whatever it was.
Right.
And it shows it. And it literally shows you the speed they're traveling or tries to. Now, I realize that's not as accurate as, as GC or anything, but it gave me something to deal with. And it wasn't really 112 like they estimated it was by the skid marks. There was sand on the deal, what have you. Right. And it was able to do it. But there's just so much out there these days. I mean, between the digital and there's so much digital. It's crazy.
Well, yeah, I've had the police come by my office because we've got cameras that show the outside of the office as well. And it's like, well, can we look at this to see what happened here? It's like, sure, I don't care. It may not the best quality, but you can certainly see what car drives by, and if you can stop it, you might get a plate. That sort of thing. It's on, and there's tag readers all over the place. I know one of the skip tracing software programs we use, you can plug in a tag, and if you're willing to pay for it, it'll show you every place that tag has shown up. I mean, hotels are big ones. So if you got somebody that's staying in a hotel and you know what car they're in, a lot of times that tag reader, people drive through those hotels every night with a tag scanner, upload them, sell the information. And it's like, well, hey, he was just at this hotel last night. He might be at that hotel again tonight. And so, I mean, it's incredible the amount of data that's just floating out there.
Oh.
But again, I guess it's sort of a question is what is evidence? And I guess evidence, we have a lot of clients, especially a lot of domestic violence cases, and people are coming, well, there's no way I'm going to get convicted because there's no evidence, there's no proof. It's just what she's telling them, and she's got no proof. And trying to explain, it's like, her telling them, that's still evidence. Isn't that the oldest evidence there is?
Yeah. It's what you're saying. It's so true, Shane. I mean, it's frustrating. We just yesterday pled a case out. A kid. There was 5 kids fighting, and then one of the kids. So they're raising a ruckus, and this 70-year-old man who's across the street, he's filming it with his iPhone because there's a little ruckus going on in the park, and the kids are fighting for a little bit, and one of the kids takes out a gun and just fires it into the ground to kind of break up the fight because his friend was losing.
Right.
And then he sees the 70-year-old who's recording it, and he takes like 20 steps at him, which, you can see the kid start to come that way, but it scares the guy so much, he drops his phone. Okay. So now all he's recorded was the kid in the fight. Well, the kid, as he walks toward him, starts pointing the gun at the old man.
Right.
And his parents, where's the evidence? Because that's the only crime they charged their kid with. They didn't charge him with shooting the gun in the group to break up the fight, which they could have. They could have.
Right.
But they thought the stronger case was the man. And they kept going, well, there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence. No, the old man is saying, that kid right there, your son, pointed a gun at him. That's evidence, and it's the CSI thing. People expect to see it in a basically a forensic model. Testimony doesn't mean anything to them anymore, or doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've seen too many documentaries and, reconstructions and everything else in the world.
Yeah.
So And kind of in the same vein, what sort of advice do you have for clients? I mean, if, what do you do if you're arrested or you're about to be arrested? I mean, I'm guessing, run like hell and scream, "You're never taking me alive, coppers." Probably not the best solution, or, the whole notion that, cops can't do that. So, I just beat the hell out of them. It's like, what is the best response if you're getting arrested?
And it's an easy one. And I go through this with so many of these people because, so many people, hotheads especially, they get mad, then all this is being recorded. It's like life is on a stage these days. And if the best way to handle it is just be respectful, request a lawyer whenever they try to talk to you, and just, bond out at your time. Unfortunately, that's not what goes on. Most people, will throw barbs back and forth, say stuff, my lawyer going to kick your ass or whatever, you're going to get yours, or, just saying dumb stuff. It's a very simple process. Like I always say, I joke with clients, Huntsville, Texas, that's where our main penitentiary is. It's filled with people that pop their mouth off. I guarantee you I don't know the amount of, it's like, remember the old show Cops where they chasing the guy and they catch him. It seems like they always catch him in that 3 feet between the cyclone fence and the side of the house. And he always lands in water. And they're, tell us what you did. It'll make things easier on you. And I always think there should be a thought bubble that says, no, tell us what you did. It makes it easier on us, because you know what I mean? Because if you don't tell cops, they may not figure it out, some of the time. But people want to just run their mouth, and, that's the only thing that's so important. Just keep your mouth shut and be respectful. Don't make it worse, And so many times, you see probably as much as I do, where people just think they can go down there and tell their story. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, you didn't do anything. We're done here. No, that's not how it works. If there was one thing I could teach people, I just let my thought go to them, would be like, when an officer is trying to ask you questions, they're not expecting the ultimate issue. Did you steal that banana? Did you touch that child? Yes, they're not expecting that. They're going to lay out opportunity and motive. That's what they're looking at. They don't expect you to give them the big prize, and once you understand that, they think, well, I just told him I didn't do it, so we should be done here. No, that's not how it works. But you've laid out that you were there. You've laid out that you've known the person. Hey, you laid out that you were mad at them. If this is a thief case, you laid out that you bought something really special 2 days later, that kind of stuff. And now they got you.
Right.
Or they're on the process of getting you.
Sure. I mean, they're not questioning you because they're trying to do you a favor.
Right. And people really, when they say, hey, we just want to get your side. And how people buy that, that's just funny. They don't want your side. They want their side. Well, and that's what's wrong. That's what's wrong with detectives. The bad ones. There's good things of everything. You know that. But the detective that works backwards, that he gets his theory, and then he works backwards to prove it. He reverse engineers is guilty. You can't do that.
Well, and then you've talked on some of your videos about the possibility of false confessions if you're talking to the police. How does that generally come into play? Are the police just? It's not so much the phone book to the back of the head false confession, but how are false confessions derived these days?
Well,
generally,
it's like we saw in the case up in Wisconsin, the Brendan Dawsey case. The reality of it is, you can wear these, especially if you take somebody that has somewhat of a mental incapacity, or somebody that's not 100% there, or and I guess the weaker the person, you can beat them down with hours of questioning. You can tire them out. Just stay at them. You scare people, telling them, hey, this is going to happen to you. Then you give them an out. Hey, if you do this, you tell us this, things will be easier on you. That's what they did to the Central Park 5. That's shocking. If you really want to, that is the ultimate case to understand a false confession, because those kids, they ultimately got confessions that were pretty on accurate with what happened on 3 of the 5. And you got to go, wow. When it turns out that they didn't do it, and, DNA clearly, showed that they didn't do it, they got the person that did it. These kids were nowhere around. that's the one that should really tell you that this stuff does happen, because there's some people, and you know this, there's people out there that think, no, that's nonsense. That doesn't happen. Nobody says they did something they didn't do. But it happens. I mean, it's not the rule. It's clearly an exception.
Yeah, obviously, but
it does happen. I mean, people keep your mind open, I mean, don't look at me like, I'm the boogeyman when I that's my theory, and it's, sight unseen. At least listen. And that's why, it's a lot easier to talk to it's a lot easier to talk to jurors than it is to go out to dinner with your friends. Because you throw that kind of stuff at your friends, they're looking at you, Ted, that's nonsense. Don't give me that crap. But a juror has to listen, and they'll put the time in. But yeah, it happens all the time. It ultimately, you wear them down, you scare them about something, and you give them an out. That's typically the big three.
Right. So, I mean, just another reason why it's best not to talk to anyone without an attorney.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if you've ever seen the book or read the book Homicide by, I think, David Simon.
No.
Anyway, he was a reporter who did a big story about, and actually, I think a lot of The Wire was based on that. He was one of the executive producers on The Wire. So some of that
I've heard
stuff was there. But, they would bring in these guys that were essentially gang enforcers. And that they knew, or they had a pretty good idea that they may have been the ones that pulled the trigger on these things, and they'd come in and question them, and they'd be like, nope, got nothing to say to you. And because so many of those homicide convictions they made the conviction because they got a confession.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it was like, well, we've got the blood on your shoes. Well, I didn't even know there was blood on my shoes.
Right.
And you're like, well, yeah. And they didn't have anything, but they got him to confess.
Right. Exactly. And they would. And yeah, that's a confession that's probably accurate, in that case,
Sure.
But it was based on lies. But, that's what I always, people want to go, well, can they do that? Yeah, unfortunately they can. The Supreme Court says you can lie,
Sure.
Which is a little bit scary. But yeah, that's, like I said, Huntsville, filled with people that just should have kept their mouth shut and they wouldn't be there.
Well, I got like 16 other things to talk about here, but since we're running close to our hour here, let's do it with the fun stuff. So popular culture, there's like 10,000 different movies and TV shows about lawyers. There's only 4 or 5 about bail bondsmen, so we don't have a whole lot. But so what?
You're gonna have this
or TV show do you think is the most entertaining or actually the most accurate? I mean, I've been watching Suits on Netflix, and it's kind of started off. The first couple 3 seasons, that I could see that. And then it's like they fired whoever their, advisor was and got in younger writers. And it's like, you've gone off the rails legally here. It's right. A fun story, but it's nothing legal here. So which ones do you think are most accurate, or at least the most entertaining to watch and somewhat accurate?
I love Suits. Suits was great. Like you said, I agree with you. When it first started, it was really great. It wasn't that far off. There was a lot of stuff that was close. If you remember back, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, The Practice with Bobby Donnell.
Okay.
The Practice was really good. There was a lot of stuff, especially from the defense lawyer perspective. Remember they had the plan B when they had a crap case. They had to come up with something. And that's kind of, they made that offensive in the show, but that's my job. Just because I'm coming up with a plan B, I've got to have something to lean on. So that was fun. Goliath, I'll tell you the one that I love, Goliath. Did you ever watch that?
I've not seen that. I'm sure Billy Bob Thornton did a great job.
Oh my God. He's so good in that. I mean, and for movies, as far as I still, about once a year, have you sat down and watched Injustice for All lately?
Yeah, with Al Pacino? Sure.
Yeah, still one of the best ones ever. And, to be honest, if you look at just all the personalities that are in the courtroom, and like when you go to the courthouse and just the different people, that really is the closest to it. That or night court, because when you show up as a criminal defense lawyer, and you got the same, like even in Houston, we got the same 40 or 50 guys that are doing most of the heavy lifting. There's another 100, but you've got your main guys and the different personalities. It's great. That kind of stuff. As goofy as night court is. But the Law and Order actually has some pretty decent some decent courtroom scenes. The one thing that is crazy, that's just so funny across the board, that always makes me laugh, is like every time a lawyer asks questions, and on TV, they're standing up and walking around. I've never asked a question standing up. I've been sat at a table in state court and federal court. I have never asked what. Well, I could occasionally get permission to show the witness a piece of paper or something and get them to reference it. But 99% of my questioning, I'm sitting at counsel table, both federal and state court down here. But they're always walking around, pacing, acting like they're frustrated with your answers. I've never seen that. So I think that's kind of nonsense. Well, Lincoln lawyer's good too. Lincoln lawyer.
Yeah. Of course, those are, that's one of those just where they're based upon books. And I think Michael Connolly has a real feel for that from, basically his background was as a crime reporter in Los Angeles. Yeah. And then parlayed that into several books. But now the one thing that he does, and I think like in the Harry Bosch novels, they never actually end up in trial. Somebody always ended up dead to close things off to where they didn't have to go to trial. Even though they made the whole case, then somebody was dead and we didn't have to have a trial. So I think he wanted to do the Lincoln lawyer so he could actually do some trial stuff in there as well. Yeah. But no, I like the new series on that as well. They've taken a single book and stretched out into a whole season versus just the one Matthew McConaughey movie on that.
Yeah, no, I like the series. That's what I've started watching, and it's really interesting. It's good.
Yeah, no, it's a good. And again, the books are, if you haven't read the books or listened to them on audio, those are great books as well. I really do enjoy Michael Connolly's writing on it. I was going to bring back up the Injustice for All, because I remember watching that movie and he was questioning his client, who was the black guy that was a cross-dressing guy. Right. And I guess it was cross-dressing at the time. I guess we'd call it transgender now, whether it's way. But he's questioning him, and he's trying to nail down, okay, so what's going on? Who can I talk to? And he's like, well, that was my cousin. And he's like, okay, what's your cousin's name? And this is the instant response was, I don't know. Right. And he's like, come on, you don't know your cousin's name? Don't bullshit me on this. Right. And it's like, that just struck me as a conversation I've had 100 times with other people when you're just trying to get some information, especially if you're looking for somebody. Well, what was that? I don't know what that person. Yes, you do. Come on, stop. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Then he goes, he looked like my cousin. Yeah. No, that was Augie. That was great. That was yeah. And we do. I'm sure you've talked to enough lawyers that know we don't get the true story. Sure. But more times than not, we can figure it out. And that usually, I'll usually say, look, I don't care if you lie to me. Lie all you want. Here's the problem with it. I need to kind of know the truth to really help you. And when the DA figures out that you've been lying to me, all I look at is a lawyer that has a client that lies to him. You're the one that it messes up. You try to get to them, and plus you got to build confidence. I expect lies on big cases, the first meeting or two. Sometimes you got to break through that. It takes a little time. I mean, they're putting their lives in your hand. So, I don't really beat them up on it. And I try to earn the truth. I'm one of those people that, I don't want to see through people. I want to see people through, and I think that benefits me, and makes you a little bit more compassionate. So sometimes, especially the sex cases and the stuff like that, the one thing I've learned about a sex case is very similar to this is, sometimes you have to separate your client from the person they're most afraid to admit that to. Like with couples, like if there's a couple and he's off, either doing the babysitter or looking at child porn, and he's deathly afraid to tell her, they'll maintain a bad position forever, despite, failing the polygraph, that I send them off to do secretly. Sure. And, I just have to get them aside and say, look, I get it. There's somebody you can't tell this to, but you need to get past that, whatever it takes, because, you're some people, let's say we have a 10-year probation offer on the table. And I know if we go, you're going to get popped with, 10 plus in the pen. You might want to look at your wife and say, yeah, I did, play with the babysitter once on the drive home, but they're just so afraid, it's scary.
Oh, I mean, and that's that's the whole, Hobbesian choice. What's more important? Do I take this plea and walk out, or do I go, oh no, absolutely, and lose because I did it, so.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, so I'm assuming Better Call Saul is not.
No, I love that one though. It's funny. And you know what? There's some stuff that he does that is pretty accurate as well. I mean, there's a lot of outlandish stuff in Better Call Saul, but the negotiating and the way he deals with some of these crazy clients, I mean, they all have a little truth in them, and the ones that make it look too formal or too, all those courtroom dramas, the CSIs make it look like a pageant,
Right.
That got a little federal court to it, but by and large, there's no state criminal court that's, they're all a mess, and we're all sitting around bitching about the judges. We got judges that, don't get, they tell you to be there at 9:00. You're waiting in a line to address them. They don't walk in till 10:45. That you don't see that on TV. That's not in Law and Order, that scene.
Well, Tad, I think we can wrap it up there. Let's see. So your website is tadlaw.com. What's your YouTube handle on that? Do we know that?
It is Tad_Nelson.
Tad_Nelson. So, I mean, basically, if you just, search Tad Nelson in YouTube,
Yeah,
you're going to come up.
Everything's on my name. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. It's fun to talk to the defense attorneys on this side, just because it seems like we have a lot more affinity there. Prosecutors are all like, and they don't necessarily see the clients. I mean, they're seeing the victims as human beings, but they're not necessarily seeing the clients as human beings as well. And so it's nice to kind of get that perspective on. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
I loved it, Shane. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Thanks. We would like to thank our guest, Tad Nelson, criminal defense attorney extraordinaire, for joining us on the podcast. You can find his YouTube videos at Attorney Tad Nelson. His firm website is tadlaw.com. And if you're in the Houston area and need a good criminal defense attorney, he's an excellent choice. Now, understanding the nuts and bolts of criminal prosecution and defense is important. There's far too much inaccurate information on TV and movies that it really does help to be reminded of the real thing. As bail bondsmen, we need to understand the process so we can make decisions about how much risk is associated with a particular crime or a particular defendant. We are, after all, in the business of guaranteeing appearance and helping support public safety. We need to be careful about our decisions, and the more we know about the system, the better our decisions will be. And we hope that you will join us at the next episode of the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we'll continue to bring you critical information and conversations with people involved in the criminal justice system.
Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf and executive produced by David Stuckman.